Alright, so in this session we are going to talk about how to generate JWT token, okay, JWT token. So I'll show you what I have done and then I'll take you back to VS Code and I'll show you where and how I've done it, okay. So before that, let me show what we did with the user's endpoint in the last session, alright. And I've gone ahead and made some changes as well and I'll talk about them as well. So for example, let me just start the server right now, okay. So my server is running. Let me show you the database. There is a user database, user collection, but it doesn't have any collection right now. It doesn't have any documents right now. Okay, so let me get back to Insomnia. And if I pass an invalid JSON, it's gonna complain that it's not able to parse the request payload. If I send the valid JSON, but the data that I'm sending is invalid, for example, the password here that is less than 8 characters, it's gonna complain that it's unable to validate the request payload. Okay, when I send the right password and the right JSON, it's gonna create the user for me. And what we had before was it used to return the ID, the document ID of the user, and I've changed it, and it's gonna return us the user. You see, it's giving us the username back. It's not including the password in the response payload because that would be just bad design. We don't want to send the password back to the user. That's just a security risk, okay? I mean, it's a big no-no. And we can see the response code that is 201. We can get back to MongoDB, and if I refresh, well, the password here is not ABC12345. It is actually uh, some kind of hash. Now I've made changes for that too, and I'll run by those changes as well. Okay, but before that, now this was what we did in the last session. All right, now I have a new endpoint. Okay, and that endpoint is auth. Okay, now auth endpoint is meant for authenticating the user. The user's endpoint was meant for creating the user, right? So let me get back to the user's endpoint again. If I send the same request back, it's gonna come back with error saying that the user exists and it's 400, right? But this is for creating the users, right? This is not for authenticating the user. So if you're trying to register or create a user that already exists, then it's gonna error, okay? But when you want to authenticate, you already have an existing user, and then you are going to authenticate, right, with the username and password. So we have an endpoint for that right now. And what we are going to do is we will be passing username and password. The password here will be hashed, and this hash will be compared against the hash that we have here. And if both hash are same, that means the user has supplied valid credentials. It is going to be passing through the same validation that I just showed you, the JSON validation, the password length, username being an email, and all those validations are valid. But there is one other thing that it is doing, and that is it is generating a token, and that's a JWT token. And you will see that in the headers here. Okay, when you authenticate, you'll also get the username being sent back to the user as a successful response. And of course, you don't send the password back. So let me go ahead and show it to you. So when I do this, I get the username back, all right, and I don't get the password back, and that's by design, okay. But if I come back to header here, I have something called auth token. This is something that I created, okay, and this is my auth token. So this is my JWT token. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to copy it, and I can hover over to my Firefox, okay, and I have this JWT IO site open, and I can just paste it here, okay, and you can see that this has some details. So this red part here is the header part. It tells me that a particular algorithm, hashing algorithm has been used here, and the token that I'm generating is of type JWT. The purple part here is my data. This is where I send some meaningful data. For example, the authorized here is true. Okay, this is an expiry. So XP here is for the expiry. So the token is valid for a certain time. Now this represents some time, although it doesn't look like time because it's actually, you can see that I have the mouse hold over there and it prints the time. So it's actually in time. Okay. And I have the user ID as well, which is my email ID that I supplied to log in. So this is my payload. And then this blue here is for verifying the signature. Okay, now the thing is that anybody who can get hold of this token, they can come to this website or they can just use some kind of library and decode this token and uh, get their hands on this data. So that is why the data that you're passing as JWT token should not be something that is secretive. Okay, it should not be something that is secretive. uh, because you don't want to put your, let's say, secret questions answered to your internet banking website. You don't want to put those answers here and then send back, or you as a server service provider, you don't want to be asking those questions and putting them back in the JWT token and sending them back to the client. Okay, now the JWT token is not stored on the server side. Okay, it is not stored on the server side like sessions are. So in the olden times, and I think still a lot of the websites, they create session and they keep the session stored in the database and they send another copy of that in the use to the user, back to the user using cookie. And when the user sends the request back again, the session is sent back to the server. It is validated against database, but the JWT token is not stored on the server. So every time somebody is accessing a protected resource with JWT token, that has been sent back to them when they authenticated, the server does not have to make a network call to database to verify it. Okay, uh, it just can verify that within the application itself. Okay, now how can it verify? Well, the first part is actually decoding. So this part, once you decode it, it's not encrypted, it's encoded. So when you decode it, you can get this data back. Okay, but this has also been signed with a particular signature. Okay, so you sign it with some kind of secret string. Okay, and the thing is that anybody who uses a different kind of string to sign this JWT token will not be able to will be generating a different kind of token here. And when on the server side, when you get this token, you not only decode it and get the code, but you also verify the signature as well. So it is during the verification of the signature you find out that if somebody has tampered with the data or not. Okay, and I think JWT is a big topic in itself, but this was just my 2 cents on it. All right, so it is used to authenticate the user. It's also more efficient. You don't have to make network calls. You are not supposed to store super secretive information here in the payload because it will be stored on the client side, not on the server side. And on the client side, somebody who's a bad actor could get hold of it and read that information. So you don't want to store super secretive information there, but they can't actually take advantage of this payload. So for example, somebody gets hold of this payload and let's say they change the expiry to 1 year. Okay, and they change this number to something that represents 1 year of expiry. Okay, but when they generate the token, they have to use some kind of secretive string, the string that is only uh, present on the server side. So when they generate the token, even with the changed payload, the signature would not match. And that way, on the server side, you can identify that somebody has tampered with the data, that the data that has been sent to me is something that I cannot validate the signature of. And that's why I'm not going to proceed with the request, right? So that was for JWT token, and that's what we are trying to do here in the session. Now let's get back to VS Code and see what has been done to accomplish it. Okay. So if you come back to main.go, I have a new endpoint that is auth. Okay, and it's in the same file that is users handler. I have a different handler now, authn user, authn for authentication. Okay, and I'll go over that function right now in just a bit. But before that, let me go over to the part where I am hashing the password. Okay, so previously when we were inserting the user into the database, we were storing the password in plain text. Okay, but now we have changed it and we are using the hash function. So bscript is a library, it's a package that we're using from Golang, and it has this method called generate from password. You give it the password that has been supplied by the user, convert it to byte, and then there's some other thing here that is called cost. Okay, I think you can explore this method and you'll find out what this other cost factor is. Uh, it just affects the hash that you generate. Okay, and so this is a hashed password that has been generated with the password that the user supplied. In our case, it was abc12345, right? And now you are going to store this password to the user. So user had supplied a password, but now you're changing it to the hash password. Now this was in bytes, you're converting it to string, okay? And then you are storing it. You're storing the user along with the hash password, okay? So that was the change that I did from the previous session, okay? Now down to our authn user handler, okay? So it is exactly the same, I think pretty much the same as our create user handler. Some of the things are very much the same. So I'm declaring a user variable. Okay, and I'm also initializing my validator to user validator here. As soon as I get the request payload, I decode it into my user variable, check for errors, and I am sending here status unprocessable entity. I think this is a more accurate representation of the response code. So we want to say that whatever has been sent to us is not processable. And I think I'm going to change it elsewhere in the code as well. So wherever I'm doing the parsing, if it's not happening, then I'm going to respond with 422. Okay. Then I'm going to validate the user. If the parsing is fine, if the JSON that's been sent to me is fine, then I validate the user for the username and password field. Okay. Although you can avoid it in this case. In the authentication, you don't want the user to get any kind of clue uh, to what they're sending is valid or invalid, right? So let's say if somebody sends a 7-character password and you send that it's the request is invalid, they come to know that okay, so the password character length has to be more than 7. So you are giving some indirect clues to them, but it's up to you. I think it's just fine to put it here. Okay, and then I have this authenticate user function, and I'll explain it to you in just a minute. When I authenticate the user, I'm basically checking for the password that has been sent to the user if it matches the one that is there in the database as well. First of all, I check if the user exists in the database, and then I check if the password that's been sent matches what's in the DB. Okay, and what I get back is a user. Okay, then what I do is I create the token. While creating the token, I use the user email field. Remember, I need that. If we see here in the payload, my email ID is part of my payload, right? So while creating the token, you need to pass this piece of information as well. Okay. Although you could pass more information, but right now we're just keeping it to the user ID, the username here, that is email. Okay. I generate the token. I handle the errors if there are any. Okay. So this token is my JWT token here. Okay, and what I'm doing here is I'm setting it into the request header, and that is XAuth token. Okay, and I'm setting this header to this token value that I received here, and that's how it is sent in the response. All right, and then I send the response back with status OK. So that was all the change that I made for our handler function. In the authenticate user function, so this is where I am actually declaring a DB user. So this is the user in DB, okay? And then here I'm check whether the user exists or not, okay? Because we are authenticating the user, so user has to exist, okay? So this is my filter here. I'm getting the requested user, and I'm actually checking for the user if it exists or not by the email ID. And then if I get a response, I try to decode it into stored user, which is here. Okay. At this point, if there's a decoding exception, I send it back using 422 response. But if I get this error specifically, that means that there was no user by this email ID. Okay, so I send the status not found, that the user by this email ID does not exist. Okay, and then I validate the password here. Okay, so what is the password here? So the password is, what is this function here? Is create valid. So it is using the same package here, bcrypt, but it has this method called compare hash and password. You send it the first argument, the stored password, the password that is there in the DB, the hashed password, okay? You convert it into byte. It was stored in the string, so you convert it into byte and you send it as the first argument, and the second argument is going to be the given password. So the password that has been given, you also convert that into byte. And then internally it's going to compare the hash of both of them and give us the result. If it is invalid, it's going to send us a false, otherwise it's going to send us true. Okay, and that's when we uh, where is it? That is when we verify that the user exists and the credentials are valid. So we send the user back. So I'm creating a new user, okay, and I'm just keeping the email field, okay, and not the password field. But you might wonder that the password field, even though I'm not filling it up, it's gonna assume some zero value, right? So zero value for string is empty string, right? So ideally I should have been able to see another field called password here equal to an empty string. But I don't see that because I've gone ahead and made a change in our user struct, and this time the password has, for the JSON tagging, it says omit empty. So if password is an empty string, it is going to omit it from the response. Okay, so that's what this part is doing. I'm not going to include this particular thing into bson, okay, because I still want that in the bson as well. Okay, so that was for is credential valid function. We also have create token function that creates a JWT token. Okay, so for JWT token, I have gone ahead and installed a package that is this GitHub JWT /go. Okay, not slash, hyphen go. And the function is very simple. You can take your time to read it. Uh, but before creating the token, I'm gonna be needing some kind of secret. So in my config file, I have created JWT token secret. Ideally, it will be picked up from this environment variable, but right now I've given it a default value that is abracadabra. Okay, that's just a magic phrase. So I'll be using that phrase to sign my JWT token, which I'm creating here. So first of all, I try to read the variable. So I've gone ahead and declared a variable here that is config.properties. Then I try to read it using its pointer value, and now I can use this. Now that it's been read, I can use it. Okay, so I create a claims variable from JWT map claims, and I give it some values. I add some properties to my claims. So one is authorized, it's going to be true. User ID is the username. So my create token is called using username, right, which is my email ID. So I set it to username, and then expiry is also times now, and then I add 15 minutes to my current time and I convert it to Unix format. and that's what I store in my expiry. Okay, and this is my uh, now I generate the new token, new with claims, and I actually give it my signing algorithm, and I send it my payload, my claim payload. Okay, and what I get back here is actually a token pointer, and I use the token pointer now to sign it with a particular string. So this time the string is my JWT token secret. I convert it to byte, a slice of byte, and then what I get back is my string, and this string is my JWT token. I check for errors and I send the token back along with nil. Okay, and that's how I generate the error. That's how I generate the token, sorry. And saving it again, showing it to you again. All right, so let me get back. The user already exists. The user element password is correct. Okay, so when I do this, I get the token here. Okay, I do it again, I get the new token. If you see the token is changing, that is because each token has a new thing in the request payload, that is the time, right? So because the time is changing, the expiry time, that thing is changing. So my payload is also changing because of that. Okay. Now if I send the wrong password, so if I send 67 here, it is going to complain that I'm not authorized. Okay, so credential invalid. And if I send something that is inappropriate or invalid, then it's going to complain that it's unable to validate the request payload because I sent the password that was less than 8 characters. If I send the right thing, it gives me back the username. So that 401 unauthorized was being taken care of. I think somewhere here, mm, I believe, yeah, so we are authenticating the user here, right? So status unauthorized is when we are not able to validate the credential. That's when we say that. All right. So I think this was a good session. And in the next session, what we are going to do is we are going to use the JWT token to invoke our products endpoints. And we will add it as a middleware function to the products endpoint. So you should only be able to delete, modify, or create a new product if you pass a valid JWT token in your request header. If you don't do that, then you get 401 and you cannot do the action that you wanted to do. So that's what we are going to do. I hope this session was useful and I'll see you in the next session. Bye.